The cop laughed as he cuffed the old veteran. "Who are you going to call?" he mocked. The veteran just gave a slight smile. "Your boss," he said, "Police Chief Connolly." On the mantelpiece in Eli Vance's quiet, book-lined study, sat a single, faded photograph. It was from another lifetime, another world. Two young men in dusty combat fatigues, barely out of their teens, stood grinning in the sweltering heat of a Vietnamese jungle. One was a young Eli, lean and wiry, his eyes alight with a fire that 60 years had tempered but not extinguished. The other was a broad-shouldered kid with a shock of sandy hair and a mischievous grin, Mark Connolly. They weren't just soldiers in the same platoon, they were brothers, forged in the crucible of a war that had defined their generation. A shared canteen, a pact made under fire, a promise to always have each other's back. Decades later, the world had spun on. Eli had gone on to a legendary, near-mythical career in the Army's elite Delta Force, his name whispered with reverence in the halls of Fort Bragg. After retiring, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had recruited him, seeking his unparalleled insight into the minds of the most dangerous criminals. Now, at 60, he was a senior consultant, a living legend who preferred the quiet company of his books to the accolades of the world. Mark Connolly had taken a different path, rising through the ranks of his hometown police department to become its chief. They didn't see each other often, but the bond remained, an unspoken pact that time could not erode. This evening, Eli was just a man driving home. His unassuming sedan hummed along the quiet suburban streets, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. He was thinking of a cold beer and a new history book waiting for him. He was a picture of tranquility, a man at peace. But in the rearview mirror, a pair of flashing lights appeared, closing in with aggressive speed. Eli sighed, a quiet breath of weary resignation. He knew this dance all too well. The legend was about to be reminded that in some people's eyes, he was just a black man in the wrong neighborhood. Officer Ellison approached the sedan with a predator's gait. He saw a 10-year-old car and a black driver, and his mind, a narrow ledger of prejudice, had already recorded the man as guilty. He leaned down, his face a mask of bored authority. "You know why I pulled you over?" Ellison began, skipping the courtesy of an introduction. Eli's hands were already on the steering wheel, visible at 10 and 2. His training, ingrained in his very marrow, took over in moments like this. Stay calm. Be predictable. Do not give them an excuse. "Good evening, officer." "I can't say that I do. I was driving at the speed limit." "You were driving too slow," Ellison countered, the absurdity of the statement hanging in the air. "That's suspicious behavior in this neighborhood. Makes people nervous." "License and registration." Eli nodded slowly. "Of course. My wallet is in my jacket on the passenger seat. The registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now, very slowly." He narrated every movement, his voice a calm, steady baritone. He retrieved the documents, his actions fluid and precise. He passed them out the window. Ellison took them but barely glanced at them. His focus was on Eli, a hostile sizing up. "What's your business here?" Ellison pressed, his tone dripping with insinuation. "I'm on my way home," Eli said simply. "Home? You don't live around here," Ellison stated, not as a question, but as a fact. It was a classic, ugly line of questioning designed to disorient and intimidate. "I live about 15 minutes from here," Eli replied, his patience a deep, quiet well. "I was taking this route to avoid some traffic on the main road." Ellison smirked. "A likely story. Got anything in the car I should know about? Any weapons? Drugs?" The script was as old as it was insulting. This wasn't about traffic safety, it was a power play, fueled by a prejudice so common it had become mundane. Eli looked at the officer, his eyes unblinking. He saw not just a man, but a mindset, a dangerous combination of insecurity and authority. "No, officer," Eli said, his voice flat. I have nothing to hide." The quiet defiance in his tone was the spark Ellison had been looking for. "Step out of the car," Ellison commanded, his voice suddenly sharp, devoid of any pretense of courtesy. Eli paused. The request was baseless. There was no probable cause, no justification for escalating the stop. "Officer, on what grounds am I being asked to exit my vehicle?" Eli asked, his tone still level, a genuine question from a man who knew the law. To Ellison, this was the ultimate act of defiance. It was a challenge to his absolute authority. "On the grounds that I gave you a lawful order," he barked, his hand moving instinctively to rest on the butt of his sidearm. "Out. Now." Eli knew he had reached a crossroads. He could argue, could cite case law, could try to reason with a man who was immune to reason. Or he could comply, letting the injustice play out, knowing that the most powerful move was to let his opponent overplay his hand. He chose the latter. With a deep sigh, Eli slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He opened the door and stepped out, his hands raised slightly in a universal gesture of non-aggression. But as soon as he was standing, Ellison acted. With a violent shove, he slammed Eli against the side of his own car. The older man's head hit the window frame with a dull thud, and a gasp escaped his lips. "I said out of the car!" Ellison yelled, his face inches from Eli's. "You want to play games? You want to be a smartass?" Before Eli could respond, Ellison had grabbed his arms, wrenching them brutally behind his back. The pain was sharp, a searing protest from aging joints. He didn't resist. He didn't struggle. He stood there, his face pressed against the cool glass of his car, and let it happen. He focused on his breathing, a technique learned in subterranean cells and high-altitude prisons. The metallic click-clack of the handcuffs echoed in the quiet street. The steel bit into his wrists, cold and tight. At that moment, watching from their porches and living room windows, the neighbors saw a police officer handcuffing an elderly black man who had offered no resistance. They saw a man's dignity being stripped away under the flashing red and blue lights. And Officer Ellison, feeling the cuffs lock into place, felt a surge of triumph. He had won. He was in complete control. With Eli secured and humiliated, Ellison's arrogance swelled. He shoved Eli towards the hood of the police cruiser, parading his catch for the growing audience of neighbors. The small red lights of cell phone cameras were now blinking from multiple directions. "See? That wasn't so hard, was it?" Ellison said, his voice dripping with condescending satisfaction. He leaned in close, his breath hot and sour. "You think you're special? Think the rules don't apply to you?" Eli remained silent, his gaze fixed on the reflection of the streetlights on the car's hood. His mind was a flurry of activity, not of fear, but of cold, hard calculation. He was cataloging every procedural violation, every word, every gesture. He was building a case in his head, a fortress of facts. To Ellison, this silence was just more insolence. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to break this old man's unnerving composure. "All right, big shot," Ellison sneered, deciding to twist the knife. "Since you're being so cooperative now, I'll let you make your one phone call." "Who you gonna call?" "Your lawyer. I bet you have one on speed dial." He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Or maybe you need to call your mommy to come pick you up." The insult was juvenile, pathetic. It hung in the air, a testament to the officer's smallness. The neighbors' filming shifted uncomfortably. This had long ceased to be about law enforcement. It was a public shaming. Eli slowly turned his head, his eyes meeting Ellison's in the reflection. For the first time, a flicker of something other than calm appeared in his expression. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to pity. He took a slow breath, the cuffed hands behind his back a constant, painful reminder of his situation. Then, his voice, still impossibly steady, cut through the officer's smugness. "Thank you, officer. That's very considerate of you," Eli said. "Yes. I would like to make a phone call. Could you please get my phone from the car? The request was so polite, so devoid of the anger Ellison craved, that it momentarily threw him off balance. Ellison, convinced this was all part of some elaborate bluff, swaggered over to Eli's car. He reached in, grabbed the simple, nondescript smartphone, and brought it back. He held it up to Eli's face, a mocking grin plastered across his own. "Okay, who's the lucky winner?" he taunted. "Let's hear it." Eli looked past the phone, past Ellison, his gaze seeming to focus on a point far in the distance. "The contact is under Mark C," he said. Ellison scoffed, scrolling through the contacts. "Mark C, alright, Mark C, it is." He was determined to play this out, to expose this old man's pathetic attempt to save face. To maximize the humiliation, he tapped the speakerphone icon before hitting dial. The sound of the phone ringing echoed artificially in the tense silence of the street. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then, a voice answered. It was deep, authoritative, and utterly no-nonsense. "Connolly." Ellison's smirk faltered slightly. It wasn't a voicemail. Eli spoke, his voice as calm as if he were ordering a coffee. "Mark, it's me. Eli." There was a half-second pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice transformed, shedding its official tone like a heavy coat, replaced by a wave of genuine warmth and familiarity. "Eli. Eli Vance. My God, old friend, it's been too long. How the hell are you? Are you in town?" The grin on Ellison's face evaporated. It didn't just fade, it was wiped clean, replaced by a mask of sudden, profound confusion. His eyes darted from the phone to Eli's placid face and back again. "Old friend?" Eli's next words were delivered with quiet, lethal precision. "I'm doing okay, Mark. A little tied up at the moment, you could say." He paused. "Actually, I'm on the corner of 5th and Oak. One of your officers has me in handcuffs. A very thorough young man named Ellison. He seems to believe I'm a public menace." Dead silence. The warmth on the other end of the line vanished, sucked into a black hole of icy fury. The voice that returned was unrecognizable. It was the voice of a commander on a battlefield, a voice that did not brook argument or excuse. It was the voice of Police Chief Mark Connolly, and it was filled with a rage that seemed to make the speaker on the phone physically vibrate. "Put Officer Ellison on the phone right now." The world seemed to slow down for Officer Ellison. The chief's voice, a low, guttural roar even through the tiny speaker, was a physical blow. The blood drained from Ellison's face, leaving a pasty, gray pallor. His hand, holding the phone, began to tremble. He stammered, his mind refusing to process the impossible reality unfolding before him. "Did you hear me, officer?" the voice boomed, the title, officer, now dripping with a terrifying sarcasm. Ellison fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it. He held it to his ear, his body language shifting in seconds from predator to prey. "Why yes, Chief Connolly, sir. This is Officer Ellison." The neighbors couldn't hear the one-sided conversation that followed, but they could see its effect. They saw Ellison's posture collapse. They saw him begin to nod frantically, his head bobbing up and down like a puppet on a string. They saw his eyes, wide with a terror that was deeply, satisfyingly real. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir." "No, sir, I did not. I thought." "Yes, sir. He's right here." "I see." "Immediately, sir." He was sweating now, beads of perspiration popping out on his forehead and upper lip. He looked at Eli, but not at his eyes. He couldn't meet his eyes. He looked at the cuffs on Eli's wrists as if they were venomous snakes he had personally attached to himself. The man he had just humiliated, the man he had dismissed as a nobody, was on a first-name basis with the most powerful law enforcement officer in the city. He hadn't just made a mistake, he had committed career suicide. He pulled the phone away from his ear, his hand shaking so badly he could barely end the call. He stared at Eli, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The smugness, the authority, the contempt, all of it had been incinerated, leaving behind nothing but the raw, naked panic of a man who knew he was utterly, irrevocably doomed. The power dynamic on the street hadn't just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. Before Ellison could even form a coherent apology, the distant sound of sirens grew into a piercing wail. But these weren't approaching with the routine pace of backup. They were screaming, converging on their location with the urgency of a major crisis. Less than 90 seconds after the call ended, 2 patrol cars and a black, unmarked supervisor's vehicle screeched to a halt, boxing in the scene. A stern-faced captain, a woman Ellison recognized as a top commander and one of the chief's most trusted deputies, emerged from the lead vehicle. She didn't even glance at Ellison. Her eyes immediately found Eli, still standing calmly in handcuffs. Her expression was a mixture of professional horror and deep respect. She strode directly to Eli. "Mr. Vance, I am Captain Rostova. On behalf of the entire department, I offer our most sincere apologies. Please, allow me to remove these immediately." She personally produced a key and uncuffed Eli, her movements quick and efficient. Ellison stood frozen, a statue of disbelief, as he watched the captain of the precinct treating his suspect with the reverence one might afford a visiting dignitary. Once Eli was free, rubbing the angry red marks on his wrists, Captain Rostova turned to face Ellison. Her face was granite. "Officer Ellison," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "On direct orders from the Chief of Police, you are hereby relieved of duty. Hand over your weapon and your badge." Ellison stared at her, dumbfounded. "Captain, it was a misunderstanding. I can explain." "Your time for explanations is over," Rostova cut him off coldly. She gestured to the 2 officers who had arrived with her. "Gentlemen, secure Officer Ellison. He is to be escorted to the Internal Affairs Division. Now." The 2 officers, their faces grim, moved in. As they took Ellison by the arms, the full weight of the situation finally crashed down on him. This wasn't a reprimand. This was the end. The justice wasn't delayed, it was brutally, terrifyingly swift. The next morning, Eli sat in a plush leather chair opposite Police Chief Mark Connolly. The chief's sprawling office felt a world away from the gritty pavement of the night before. Mark, his face etched with exhaustion and regret, slid a folder across his polished desk. "He's gone, Eli," Mark said, his voice heavy. "Fired. The district attorney is pressing charges for unlawful detainment and assault under color of authority. He'll never wear a badge again. Not in this state, not in any state if I can help it." Eli nodded, taking a sip of the coffee Mark had poured for him. "It wasn't just him, Mark. You and I both know that. He's a symptom of a disease." Mark leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. He looked his old friend in the eye. "You're right. And I'll be damned if I let that disease fester in my department. What he did to you, it could have been anyone. And that's what keeps me up at night. That's why I called you here. This can't be just about firing one bad apple. This has to be a catalyst." Eli looked out the large window at the city skyline. "What do you have in mind?" "I want you to help me fix it," Mark said, his voice raw with sincerity. "Your experience, your perspective. God, Eli, you profile the worst of humanity for a living. You understand the warning signs better than anyone. I want you to help me build a new training program from the ground up. Not some HR seminar. A real, gut-level overhaul of how my officers see the communities they're supposed to serve." It was a heavy ask. But looking at his old friend, Eli saw not a politician, but a soldier who knew a battle needed to be fought on a new front. The final scene wasn't one of revenge, but of reconstruction. Months later, Eli Vance stood not in a courtroom, but in a police academy classroom. He wasn't a witness, he was a teacher. At the front of the room, standing beside him, was Chief Mark Connolly. Together, they were launching the Connolly-Vance Community and Veterans Outreach Initiative. Eli's new battlefield wasn't in some foreign jungle, but here, in the minds of young recruits, teaching them to see the humanity behind the assumptions. His first lesson was projected on the screen behind him: threat or humanity, how to tell the difference. The war for respect was far from over, but a legendary soldier had just opened a new, vital front. True power is the ability to build bridges, not walls. What quality do you think is most important for a leader to have? Tell us in the comments, and comment respect for those who have the courage to fix a broken system. Subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire change.